Welcome to In the Thick of It, a podcast brought to you by Answering the Call. I'm David Fuller, the founder and director of Answering the Call. In the thick of it. You know, there's a lot of people who like to stay on the fringe. They tend to like keeping things safe. And then there are others who dive into what God is doing in the world and around them. Actually, they're ordinary people, but they're doing extraordinary things as they take the gospel to regions that are difficult to reach. Welcome to In the Thick of It. I'm excited for you today to meet Jeff Struecker, a friend of mine, a new friend. Jeff was an Army Ranger. Jeff was also an Army chaplain. Maybe you remember the story of Black Hawk Down, a very difficult and tough mission in Somalia. Well, Jeff was a part of that mission, in fact, a very key and integral part of that mission. Today, we get to sit down with Jeff and understand from his perspective what it's like to face death, not from a distance, but face to face. And more importantly, to understand what it is like to live life on mission. I think you're going to enjoy it. Hey guys, welcome to our podcast. This podcast, of course, sponsored by Answering the Call. Great to have you with us. Today we have with us Jeff Struecker. Jeff is pastor of a church here. We're in Columbus, Ohio. Not Ohio, we're in Columbus, Georgia.
The other Columbus.
The other Columbus, right? Jeff is a pastor here, a pastor of Two Cities Church here in Columbus. And formerly, Jeff worked with the Rangers. He was a Ranger on assignment, and we'll talk a little bit about this today. But he was a Ranger on assignment during Black Hawk Down in Somalia.
That's exactly right? You got it right.
All right. And so we want to talk about those things. But before we do, I thought just to kind of set a little bit of a backdrop, and I think it helps people understand kind of where we're coming from. I wonder if you would give us just a little bit of an outline or some thoughts around how it is you came to faith and how it is you came to be a believer.
Sure. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My parents divorced when I was young, and neither parent really had anything to do with going to church. Yeah. So when I was 13 years old, my next door neighbors came by to talk to me. And this is really the first time in my life anybody ever shared the gospel with me. I went to church a time or two with friends when I was a kid, but I really wasn't connected to a church. My neighbors came by to talk to me, and they explained the gospel to me for the first time. And I got to tell you about this couple for just a second, sure, because they're a young married couple. I'm living in an apartment complex. They don't have children, they're newly married, and they were kind of like a big brother, big sister to me. They always wanted to hang out, they wanted to do stuff with me. I remember this really vividly because they lived directly across the hall in this apartment complex, and one night they come over to my apartment and they're acting really, really weird. They said, "Hey, can we sit down and talk to you?" And I was like, "Sure, what's going on? What's up?" And they started to, what I realize now is explain the gospel to me. Right. So they told me about sin. They described to me about what Christ did for me on the cross. And then they didn't twist my arm or anything. They just kind of explained, "Hey, here's how you can nail your salvation down. Here's how you can surrender your soul to Jesus." And they were really, really scared. I mean, it was obvious when they were talking to me. They were all over the place.
They weren't just pros looking for another.
No, I am convinced I'm the first person they ever shared their faith with. And then they kind of said, "Hey, just do this," and they ran away. So, true story, I sat there thinking about it. Later on that night, I knelt down by the side of my bed, 13 years old. First time in my life I've ever heard the gospel, and I surrendered my soul to Jesus Christ, and He radically, totally changed me.
That's awesome, man. It's you know, sometimes we think of evangelism or you know, it's like this is something that's set aside for the pros. But really what you're talking about in terms of just kind of investment of time and relationship, that's really where it's at, and that's really what you're responding to.
I'm convinced they had never shared their faith with anybody. I'm the first person that they ever shared it with. They were so nervous and stumbling all over themselves, but I understood it.
Yeah,
it made perfect sense to me, and I've never had a chance to really get to go back and to thank them for it. But what I'm trying to tell people is you don't have to be a pro at this, because if anybody just kind of stumbled their way through it, this couple did, and it all made perfect sense to me.
And they left the apartment that night batting 1,000.
Right, that's exactly right.
So, okay, so this is your faith then, it was kind of sown into you by this couple, and you responded to that. Now if we're flashing forward a little bit, I know you've told this story many times, but I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your experience in Somalia, your experience with Black Hawk down there, and even, what the Lord did there.
Yeah. Let me give you kind of the Reader's Digest on how I ended up in the Army and in the Ranger Regiment first. Okay. Because I had this really terrifying fear of dying. Before this couple shared Jesus with me, this was a regular occurrence that I would wake up in the middle of the night and freaking out about what happens to you after you die. And because I didn't come from a church family, nobody in my family really knew the answers to that question. So I'm 18 years old. I'm a Christian. There's no question about where I'm going to spend eternity. I'm a senior in high school, but I really don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
Right.
And I also I want to find out, am I really over this fear of dying? So I, on a whim, just with no real thought put into it, go talk to an Army recruiter. I end up enlisting in the Army while I'm still in high school. As soon as graduating from high school, I join the Army, get stationed in Fort Benning, Georgia, which is just outside of Columbus, where we're at right now. I end up in my first assignment in the Army 75th Ranger Regiment, the Special Operations Unit. And my goal in going to the Army in the first place, but my goal in going to the Rangers, is to first test myself and see, am I tough enough to serve with the best of the best? But I also want to have a chance to go to war and to see if I'm really over this fear of dying.
I have it in me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm in the Army for a couple of years. The U.S. invades the Republic of Panama, 1989. I take part in that invasion as a sergeant in the Ranger Regiment. Get shot at a time or two in Panama, but it really wasn't one of those life or death things.
Okay.
I stay in the Army. A year later, the U.S. is involved in Desert Shield and Desert Storm in Kuwait. I get sent over to Kuwait with the Army Rangers, and in a firefight in Kuwait. Again, it's not really life or death. Couple of years later, I stay in the Army, I stay with the Army Rangers, and now it's 1993, and the U.S. is involved in Somalia, trying to hand out food to a country that is literally starving to death.
Right. I remember
The capital city, Mogadishu, is descending into chaos, and there's some warlords, like gang leaders, that are kind of fighting each other, trying to become the most powerful man in the country.
Sure.
One of those warlords, named Mohammed Farah Aidid, starts to target United Nations workers, starts to target U.S. supply convoys, and in the summer of 1993, he ambushes and murders 24 United Nations workers from Pakistan.
Right.
This caused the United Nations Security Council to meet, and they decided, hey, we have to do something about this. We have to respond to this aggression. That's the reason why Task Force Ranger goes to Somalia.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because, of course, a lot of people, and I have as well, seen the movie, but I've never understood the geopolitical background to all that.
Yeah.
And it's just helpful in that. That gives context.
So
I appreciate it.
if you watch the movie, the first 30 seconds, you get all of that text that kind of tells you what's going on in Somalia. But what it doesn't tell you is, how does the U.S. go from handing out food to helicopters and Humvees getting shot up?
Exactly.
And the answer is, Aidid starts to target United Nations workers. The United Nations Security Council meets and says, we got to do something about this, which prompts the U.S. to send Task Force Ranger. So it's my unit, a company of Rangers from Fort Benning, Georgia, a helicopter unit from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and some more special operations soldiers. And we go to Somalia to go get Aidid. That's really the reason why we're there. It's not to hand out food, but to go kill or to capture Aidid and his clan.
Right.
I think when people hear about my faith and they realize that I was in Black Hawk Down, they think, oh, the guy got shot at and he got religion over there. He got scared and he got religion over there. And I tell people, no, actually, it's almost the exact opposite. So I'm a 24-year-old squad leader. I've been to combat to Panama.
24 years old.
Yeah. Been to Kuwait. I've been shot at before. This is not my first rodeo, and I know what it's like to go to war. But Somalia is different because of how intense the enemy is, how intense the enemy gunfire is, how severe the battle is. And in this big 18-hour firefight, most of us got to the point where we were completely convinced we're going to die. It was just the sheer numbers. You got a couple of hundred guys on Humvees and helicopters against what's probably 10 to 20,000 armed Somalis.
Okay.
And for the most part, I'm moving guys in and out of the city on Humvees. That's kind of my role in Somalia. And one of the guys is shot and killed right behind me, Dominic Pilla. This is portrayed in the movie. My vehicles are shot to pieces. I'm absolutely convinced that I'm going to die. And I also get tasked to keep going back and forth, in and out of the city streets, over and over again. Going in the first time, knowing that it was going to be bad is one thing. Right. Going in after you've already been shot to pieces,
Can't imagine.
Whole nother thing.
Can't imagine.
And in the midst of that, I had this, I can't take credit for this, man. I don't even know how to describe it, but I just had this overwhelming sense of peace, this supernatural sense of peace. Like, I know I'm going to die, but I am absolutely certain where I'm going to spend eternity. So I'm not at all scared. I don't want to do anything that would cost one of my men their lives. Yeah. But over and over again, driving in and out of the city streets, I just simply try to do my job and do it to the best of my ability.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you at that point, is that something that is from within you, or is that a piece you think that's coming from?
It's definitely the way the Bible describes it, this peace that passes all understanding, right? Yeah. In fact, a very specific moment in Somalia, Dominic Pilla's just been shot and killed behind me. My vehicle is covered with blood. I'm preparing to go back out in the city streets. There's a scene in the movie Black Hawk Down where one of the guys says to me, hey, you need to go clean this Humvee up, and this is exactly how it happens.
I remember that scene, yeah.
I'm pulling this Humvee off to the side. I'm cleaning the blood up. I'm getting ready to go back out in the city streets, and I know this is a suicide mission. I will die. There's no question in my mind. And in the back of that Humvee, I'm thinking, I don't think it's even remotely possible, but if I survive this thing, I go back home to Fort Benning, Georgia, married, got a baby that's on the way, go back home to my family. Yeah. But if I die in Somalia because of Jesus' death and resurrection, I know exactly where I'm going to spend eternity. And I kind of came to this moment where it was either I go home to Fort Benning, Georgia and to my family, or I go home to my Father in heaven.
And you're at peace.
But no matter how this goes down next, I'm not going to worry. I'm going to trust whatever happens next in God's hands. And from that moment on, I had total peace the rest of the night. I was absolutely sure I was going to die, but had peace about it. And that's really, I think, a big part of my story is my friends that saw the way that I conducted myself in Somalia realized that that guy's got something that I don't have, and started asking me questions about my faith.
Well, let me tag on something. We Answering the Call works in some more oppressed parts of the world. I think it was, I don't have a story that can even come close to what you're talking about, but I did, maybe it was a little over a year ago, and we were going through, we decided to try to break this, we were in Sudan. We were going to break a government blockade and take relief into some people who were starving. And so as we did that, we had to pass through this one ambush point, and it was very clear that they were there. They were like in elevated positions. It was very clear that they were there, and the thought was, my thought was, I knew, okay, it was that same kind of like, okay, they're going to fire on us. We had some contingency of soldiers with us, but it was not it wasn't 200 Army Rangers. And so I thought, they're going to fire on us. And the way they're positioned, there's no way out of this. And so I had this same experience you're talking about, though. As we begin to kind of move through that ambush point, and I was in the vehicle, and I'm kind of waiting for...
You're waiting for the inevitable. Here it comes.
Yeah. But it was like that same piece you're talking about. I'm telling you, it was almost palpable in the car. Okay, and it was like strange. This like kind of time slowed down, but you're in this really peaceful place. The only way I know how to describe it was it was like you're in the presence of the Lord.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's what it was, right? But I had a strange reaction as we came out of it, and that real palpable sense of God's presence that brings that peace as it began to leave, not go away, but I mean, where you could sense it like that. Like I didn't want to leave it. If you follow,
yes.
Kind of getting that,
yeah.
And it was like So I guess what that makes me wonder is like when you experience that kind of experience that you're describing, and I know that when I experienced something remotely similar, what do you do? How hard is it? Hard to come home?
Oh, it is. Yeah. There are some guys and gals in the military that will become adrenaline junkies, and just getting shot at and the sheer action of it becomes a huge letdown when you come back to the relative safety of home.
Yeah.
But I think for believers, when you've got a sense of the presence of the Lord, even if it's in the midst of the storms of life, you long for that so much that you would be willing to, bring some more storms if that's what it takes.
So when you're having that kind of experience, what now? You roll back into Columbus, Georgia. What was that like?
Yeah, well, Somalia became a real defining moment for me, though.
Okay.
Because I really believed God placed me on planet Earth to be an Army Ranger. I love what I'm doing. I'm really good at it. I love Jesus. I love the military. I love both of these things at the same time. And I'm just going to do this for the rest of my life. That's really what I believed for most of my first few years in the Army. Immediately after this battle is over with in Somalia, my friends started coming up to me and they were asking me questions about God. They were asking me, hey, where do you go after you die? And what is it like? And why did God let stuff like this happen to me? And there was a moment, I've never really heard the voice of God, but there was a moment where I really felt like God was saying, Jeff, you were ready for anything last night because you have already settled you've already got your soul right with me. Yeah. You are ready for eternity. These guys are not, and they need help. And I want you to help them.
So whether or not you heard the voice of God, you knew it was the voice of God.
It was as clear as anything in my life. I felt the Lord pushing me towards some kind of ministry. I didn't know what it looked like then. Right. Kind of thought it would be the mission field for a while. And then I started going to college while I was still in the Army, did an undergraduate degree while I was in the Ranger Regiment. I eventually went to seminary and became an Army chaplain. And I became an Army chaplain just so that I could go back to those same Rangers who I served with in Somalia and say, look, guys, I know what you're going through. Yeah. I was right there with you at one point. And let me tell you the difference that having a genuine faith in Jesus makes when life gets hard.
And okay, so then you served as chaplain for how long?
For 10 more years. And then I ended up retiring from the Army, just short of 23 years total when I retired, but I retired in 2011.
Okay, so now help me though. Translate those experiences into, now I'm pastor of Two Cities Church here in Columbus. How does it all tie together? What's the thread?
Yeah, the easy answer to the question is the Great Commission. Like when Jesus was standing on that hill in Jerusalem before he left earth to go back to his Father in heaven, he made it crystal clear to his followers, this is what I want you to do with the rest of your life. In fact, this is what I want you to do for the rest of time, and when you're done with it, I'm coming back. So while I was in the Army, I felt like my job is to make disciples and to reach as many soldiers as I can who will go all over the world and reach the nations. After retiring from the Army, I stayed in a military community that has a real global influence, and my goal is to personally go, but also to challenge Christians, especially Christians that have really never gone anywhere to advance their faith, and to say, look, man, God was serious. Jesus really meant what he said when he said, to the ends of the earth. So it's time for us to get as serious about that as Jesus was.
You're seeing it as like a pastor, as pastor of two cities. It's not like, okay, I'm pastor, I'll preach to the choir every Sunday. It's a pastor in the sense that I am going to lead a body of people to reach the world.
That's exactly right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the goal of Christianity, as I understand it, after Jesus leaves, is to just advance the message to every corner of the globe. And our church, Two Cities Church, and I believe every church, should be radical about that goal.
Okay, define for me radical.
You would sell your house and put your possessions on the market and leave your job and go move halfway across the world if God says go do that. Now, I've challenged families, put it all on the market, leave the career, go overseas. I've challenged students, once you finish high school, don't go to college, go overseas and spend a year on a gap year. I've challenged people that are about ready to retire. Listen, instead of going to the golf course, why don't you take all of that money and go spend it and go overseas and spend a year, 2 years, 5 years living overseas and go to some place that's never heard the name of Jesus before.
Jeff, you're saying go to this place that's never heard the name of Jesus. Because honestly, I've been at this game for 20 years or so. And sometimes even overseas, I can feel like we're preaching to the choir. And so, as you're seeing, we're seeing a lot of change in our own culture. We're seeing a lot of change in Western attitudes. What is it you think will be required of those who are like, no, I'm going to go and I'm going to go to some places that haven't heard the name of Jesus? There's some particular challenges. What's required?
Well, I think part of what it's going to take is you have to believe in the mission enough that you're willing to sacrifice whatever it's going to ask of you. If Jesus says sell it all, then you have to say, okay, I don't want to. This is going to hurt, but I'm going to sell it all. I watched a married couple who had a brand new baby sell it all, go on the mission field, and go overseas to a closed country that's being persecuted with the gospel, saying, if this is what God is asking me to do, I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to look back. And their family and everybody else was saying to them, are you insane? And I wanted to say to everybody, no, they really understand the Great Commission. This is what he's asking us to do. Not everybody has to sell it all. Not everybody's supposed to sell it all. But everybody is supposed to be willing to sell it all and to go.
And even if you're not selling it all, be engaged.
Yeah.
And I think though, part of the Great Commission is it's like to all nations or all ethnos, all people. And we've kind of reached a point, I think, where the peoples that have yet to hear are largely in countries where Christianity is persecuted or where Christianity is under pressure. That makes me think, we have to then employ some methods maybe that we're not accustomed to in order to really reach those places. Thoughts?
I agree.
I saw you smiling.
No, well,
I knew I had you.
yes, because Jesus makes the statement, the kingdom of God is for men who are taking it by force.
I hear you.
And I think to myself, I think what he meant by that is I'm looking for guys and gals that are willing to just do stuff different. Because if we were honest, a lot of what we've been doing as Christians in America or really around the world hasn't made that big of an impact for a long time. Not trying to call anybody out, but I'm just saying, man, if you look at the results. So then Jesus is saying, okay, if you really want to make some results, you're going to have to do stuff a little bit different, which may get you criticized. It may even get you, persecuted a little bit. You got to be willing to say, okay, if I really believe in the mission, I'm going to find a method that's going to make the mission successful. and follow that, however unconventional that method may be. Now, this is from a guy who did special operations and is very comfortable doing unconventional things.
But I think that's exactly my point, though. I think we're going to have to get to a place where we're comfortable doing some unconventional things. I also think that sometimes we can, if we, I know this is kind of crazy. I told you I'd never say this on camera, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Uh-oh.
If we put ourselves in a position to where like God has to move, man. He has to do something, or
I'm in big trouble.
Out of this one,
or I'm in big trouble.
In the same way I came in. Like, what happens though in that scenario is that we do get to see him move, and there's a revelation that occurs, and it's like I'm not an adrenaline junkie in the sense I want to get shot at. However, I do love that position of, okay, there's nothing I can do here. What you got? And then watching him move and watching it happen.
I wouldn't wish Somalia and what I went through in Somalia on my worst enemy. But I'll say this, and I will say this without any hesitation. I will go back through it again tomorrow because of what it did for my faith. And I would hope that other Christians would say, man, I really don't want that to happen to me, but if that's what it takes for God to develop my faith in a way that just can't be developed in my air-conditioned living room, if that's what it takes, then I'm willing to go through that. And I think our comfortable, complacent faith, sometimes we don't get a chance to see God move in the way that he really wants us to because we don't put ourselves in a position where he can move that way.
You're saying it better than I'm saying it. But that's exactly my point. So, you want to go with us one day?
Yeah, I'd love to.
You want to go in deep?
Of course.
Way in?
Yeah.
All right.
Of course.
Man, I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
Well, thank you.
We guys, a lot of you will want to pray for Jeff and pray for Two Cities Church here in Columbus, like the vision that God's given them to really develop a body that is invading the world and where we're seeing the kingdom expand into some places that it just hasn't been before. Like, that's an amazing vision. God, dude, we're praying for you guys.
Thank you.
And I look forward to the day when we get to go in.
Man, that'd be great. I'd look forward to doing it with you together.
That'd be great. So guys, thank you so much for being with us. We do ask that you continue to pray for Jeff and pray for us as we continue to really seek out those places where the Lord wants us to go and continue to try to be creative in our strategy and position ourselves in ways that we were just talking about, that only He can move, and ultimately that many would come to faith. And so pray for us, pray for Jeff. God bless you, man.
Blessings to you too, man.
All right, so guys, we're going to move to our rapid fire questions. You ready for rapid fire questions?
I'm ready. Fire away.
All right, I'm going to give you like 4 questions. We're asking you to respond. Just give me the first thing that's on your mind.
Okay.
If you overanalyze, you're going to mess up rapid fire questions.
Okay.
You don't want to do that. All right.
All right.
All right. Rapid fire question number 1: if you could put anything on a billboard and proclaim it to the world, what would that billboard say?
Well, it would basically be that without Jesus, there is no real hope.
Agreed. Thank you. Number 2. All right. When you think about success, who's the first person that comes to your mind and why?
I'm going to define success a little bit differently. So I think families, I think parents, I think a faithful father or a faithful mother that just simply lives their faith out, and then their children say, I'm going to be like that, or I'm going to marry somebody like that one day. In my mind, that's kind of the pinnacle of success. When somebody says, I'm going to become like that, or I'm going to marry somebody like that one day.
Okay, so if we're defining success, I like the definition. You're defining success that way. What person comes to your mind?
Well, some of the most successful people would be stay-at-home moms who invest everything that they got every day, all day long in their children, and they're handing their faith off to their children, and their children are saying, I'm going to marry somebody like her one day. I'm going to become a mom like her one day.
I'm going to run with this.
Yeah.
You're basically discipling your children.
That's exactly right.
All right, number 3. what is a life-changing book that you would either recommend or you would give to somebody?
The easy answer to this one is the Bible.
No, but this ain't
I don't
Sunday
think
school.
you
Come on.
wanted the easy Sunday
this ain't
school
Sunday
answer
school.
to this one. There's a couple of books that God really, really used to grab a hold of my heart. I have had some recommended reading for my sons.
Yeah.
But these are guy-specific books. I think there's a couple of books that every Christian ought to read, and I'm talking specifically Christian now. One of them is The Confessions of St. Augustine. And Augustine is just brutally honest in this one about who he was before he met Christ, what it took for Christ to change him, and the kind of man that he became after meeting Christ. So this is a book I think every Christian needs to read.
Confessions of St. Augustine. I've never read it. I got to catch up with you.
Written in the 300s and written by one of the greatest church leaders of all times.
I got to catch up with you. Last question. Simple one. We just want to know, how can people get in touch with you, or how can they just kind of follow you? What platforms you're using? We want them to pray for you. We want them to be involved.
I'm on all of those social media channels. The easiest way to find those is just to go to my website, jeffstruecker.com.
All right, jeffstruecker.com. And guys, visit answeringthecall.org, and we'll look forward to seeing you. Thank you for joining us today in the thick of it. Great guest today. I hope that God put something in you today that you can apply and keep with you for a long time. Let me personally thank those of you who continue to pray and who continue to give to the work of answering the call in our world's most difficult places as we continue to stay in the thick of it. We invite you to visit us at answeringthecall.org and follow us on Instagram at ATC Missions. We are also on Facebook under Answering the Call. Finally, you can email us at info@answeringthecall.org. Send us any questions you have about today's podcast and any questions you might have about answering the call. We would love to get those and be able to respond. And for those of you who do that, we will draw from that pool of names, and for the winner, we will send you the book our guest mentioned today, the book that was influential in their lives. That will be our gift to you. We look forward to being with you again next month in the thick of it. God bless you. Be well as you stay in the thick of it.